All right, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our second Stanford Biodesign webinar about the Innovation Fellowship. So this webinar is one that is essentially a Q&A with some alumni of the fellowship program. And what we will attempt to do today is go through a couple of questions with this group and then pull up questions from the Q&A section in order to address as many of the questions that you may have about the program as we can possibly get through in an hour. So please use the Q&A area to show us what you're interested in hearing about. We'll start with introductions. So I've got a great group here with me today, and I'll let them introduce themselves. So if each of you guys could give just a short introduction of your background and what year you did the fellowship, that would be great. So we'll start with Ariel, since she's on my left.
Perfect. So, hi, I'm Ariel August. I am currently a general surgery resident at Stanford, and I just completed the Biodesign Fellowship this past year at the end of the pandemic, so I can also answer questions about that. And so I did the fellowship during the research time in the middle of my residency.
Great, perfect. Shreya, why don't you go next?
Yep, Shreya Mehta. I was in the fellowship 2013, 2014. I'm a biomedical engineer by training. Also worked at FDA for a while, so I have an engineering and regulatory background. And after the fellowship program, started a company with my biodesign teammate, Nick Damiano, which we're still running, 6-year anniversary tomorrow of our incorporation, and in the clinical phase of our product. So,
perfect. Thanks, Shreya. Rush, why don't you go next?
And my name is Rush Bartlett. Background is chemical engineering, and then went on to do a master's in business and a PhD in biomedical engineering before coming out to biodesign. Was an entrepreneur for about 7 years, did a variety of businesses, and then now went to the dark side of industry, leading product development for a women's health company called Lansino.
Great, thanks, Rush. That leaves you, Vic.
Hi, I'm Vick McCrae. I'm a general and trauma surgeon by background. I completed the fellowship in 2011, after which myself and a team member co-founded a company based on a project we worked on at Biodesign, and I currently serve as CEO of that company.
Great, and everybody, I'm Sandy Ruggles. I did the fellowship in 2009, 2010. Before the fellowship, I was in biotech, so I'm trained in biophysics. And after, I switched into medtech, and I have, over the last 10 years, had various roles in both large medtech companies and more recently as a consultant, primarily to small and mid-stage medtech companies around business strategy and product development. So we're gonna kick off with a couple of questions here as we start to get some questions in the chat. So let's start at the very beginning. So how did each of you decide to apply to the fellowship? What was it that caused you to think, oh, I really want to do this, and to go through the work of putting in that application? So we'll go reverse order. Vic, why don't you start?
Absolutely. So I decided to apply to the fellowship during my 4th year of general surgery residency. As I began to use more and more devices to treat patients, I realized how important these devices were, and also began to have my own ideas as to new devices that I thought would be useful. But I also realized I had no idea what to do with any of those ideas. And around the same time, I learned about the Biodesign Fellowship and thought that it would be a great way for me to learn a process of how to evaluate my own ideas and to determine if those were ideas that I wanted to move forward. So that's what caused me to want to apply to the program.
Great, thanks, Vic. So Rush, how about you?
So I was an undergraduate at the University of Texas when I was looking for master's degree programs in biomedical engineering. I just stumbled across the Biodesign website and thought to myself, wow, this is amazing. 1 year they'll pay you, you get to start a company or be an entrepreneur, you get to go shadow great physicians and learn from great mentors. But as an undergrad from Texas with a sort of average GPA, I wasn't sure I was going to get in, so I clicked on the resumes of people that were in the program that year, one of which was a gentleman by the name of Michael Ackerman, who was very impressive at the time, had 20 research publications and all these degrees and things. What led me to the fellowship was basically sleeping on it and thinking to myself, I want to be like those people that I saw on the website, and charted a path over about a 4-year period to go to graduate school for a business degree and for an advanced degree in engineering to kind of come back to the fellowship. So for those of you who may be on the younger side in the webinar, I would say that this can be a multi-year process, and I'm sort of proof to that.
All right, Shreya, how about you?
Yeah, so being a biomedical engineer by training and also having a regulatory background, I sought an opportunity where I could kind of understand more holistically how devices come to where they are and how they're successfully, available to our patients and caregivers. And so it was really while I was at FDA trying to gain that perspective, and also stumbled upon the website and found out about the program. Also partly by desire to work, closer to the West Coast rather than near DC. But mostly, the thing that I think I like to point out is that I never really had a drive to be an entrepreneur, even though that's kind of where I am now, jumped in the deep end. But it was really the educational opportunity and the access to the types of people that you get to meet through the program. And again, the holistic perspective, knowing that, there are conversations and learnings from VCs and IP attorneys and, reimbursement experts, regulatory experts, and just gaining a better understanding of how our field really works was my primary drive to apply.
Great. How about you, Arya?
Yeah, so I did my undergraduate degree also in biomedical engineering, focusing on biomechanics and biomaterials, and always wanted to invent cool things, but knew I wanted to go into medicine. And so ever after going to medical school, I was trying to figure out how to reintegrate those two kind of passions of mine. And I came across the Biodesign Innovation Fellowship while I was a medical student out on the East Coast. And so when I was applying to residencies, I was looking for programs that had something kind of built in where I could make my professional niche in kind of entrepreneurship, innovation, and building cool things. And so I was lucky enough to match at Stanford, and we have built-in professional development time. It's called, a lot of other programs call it research time. And so I applied for the fellowship to do during that time because I thought it would give me the opportunity to learn. First of all, I have plenty of ideas, but no idea, similar to Vic, like what to do with them. I want to build things. I don't know anything about regulatory processes or how to like size a market. I could learn it kind of early and still have the rest of my training and career as a physician to really be immersed in the medical field and learn a lot more and have the opportunity to utilize these skills. And so it was definitely my drive to apply for biodesign, and I was lucky enough to kind of keep that path going.
Great. And then I come from a slightly different side. So I came out of biotech, and I actually came out of a startup. So I started a company out of my PhD, and I was busy in the depths of trying to develop a therapeutic. And I got really frustrated. So small companies are great, but small companies don't have great processes built into them. And if you've never been at a company that has any of the business processes built in, you often find yourself stumbling through your way to success. And so I was both frustrated with the long timelines that biotherapeutics require, 20 years sometimes to go from an idea to being in patient care. And I was I was growing frustrated with the startup environment. So I applied for and used the Biodesign Fellowship as both a way to transition out of biotech and into medtech, where I felt like I could get a much closer connection to patients and physicians, and to make a transition from being a bench scientist and being at a startup to a larger company and on the business and strategy side. So I did a double jump transition with my Biodesign Fellowship. Okay, so let's see. Next question. So what was the highlight of your fellowship year? And I will, does anyone want to just jump up? Ariel's going to say COVID, I'm sure.
Definitely COVID was the highlight of my biodesign year. I think there were a lot of really great points within the fellowship, so it's hard to pick one. One, it's always really great when you get your teams and get to your specialty and do kind of clinical immersion. And so the first kind of team bonding experience is really nice during boot camp because you're meeting all these really incredible people with really strong backgrounds and you're learning from each other. And it's fun to be around like-minded people that like you want to learn and want to investigate and want to create. So that's really, really inspiring. And then what I think maybe the second biggest highlight for me is towards the end of the fellowship, and even though we were mostly remote for the end of my fellowship, was kind of going out into the world and realizing you had learned a lot. Because it's very much as you're going through the process, you're like in the weeds and you're not really understanding and you feel like you're failing all the time, writing your needs statements or picking out needs. And then you go out and you like are like looking at something for yourself, and then you're like, oh, but we need to make sure this, and like there's this problem and we don't have this insight, and you're like, oh wow, I really learned a lot over these last few months. And so I think it's very much trusting the process, and you really do come out on the other side as something really, really learning a lot of valuable things.
Nice. Rush?
I would say that there's obviously the surface level things that should be apparent if you've done some research about the fellowship. Those are things like there's an amazing network, just truly, groundbreaking medical device innovations and innovators behind them over not just people that have come through the fellowship program, but all the mentors around it that have started amazing companies that have truly changed the world in healthcare, that are just willing to kind of have a cup of coffee with you and give you advice on your projects. Like you can't get that anywhere else. So that is amazing. As an engineer, having no sort of clinical experience coming in, being able to just walk around the hospital and ask sort of the stupid, naive questions to really talented physicians who were on my team was, I would say, equally as important, if not more important, than sort of the advice from all the talented and professional people that are around the program for advising. But something subtle and something that I didn't really appreciate until I got out of the fellowship was how impactful actually learning and living the biodesign process would be on my life over these last 8 years. It's truly changed the course of my entire career to just sort of live and breathe this process. I can't really explain it. You kind of have to live it.
Sandy, but I'll jump in. So I'll echo everything that everyone said. The team aspect of this and the individuals that you get to work with and become friends with, probably for life. And the individuals that will become your colleagues in your future was fantastic. I'll take a different avenue of this and actually answer the first question on this list. One of the things I found fantastic coming from a medical background was that the program really opened my perspective as to the breadth and types of careers that were available to me. We've had graduates go into all different sorts of fields after biodesign, from startup executives to leading innovation at large, Fortune 500 companies, to going into venture capital, becoming consultants. We've had people going to intellectual property. So all different sorts of opportunities are really opened through the biodesign process and through the biodesign network that I never knew were options for me as a doctor. So I think that was the best thing.
Shreya, how about you? Highlight of the fellowship.
Yeah, I think similar to what Rush said, I do think having exposure to the clinical fields and being able to really see how products are used by patients, by caregivers, and really taking the biodesign lens of observation and listening to struggles and listening to things that are working right. was incredibly insightful. And that's, you know, clinical observation is obviously one of the core tenets of biodesign, that you gotta get that firsthand experience to truly understand what the unmet clinical needs are. And starting at that point was really interesting and exciting and insightful, and is an important point to jump off from to really be able to run a successful project.
I will jump in and add my own perspective on this. I agree that the clinical immersion is a really important part of the fellowship for those of us who hadn't necessarily had any experience being in a hospital setting. The other highlight for me of the fellowship year was really the amount of time and the learnings around brainstorming that we did at the Stanford D School. So in my fellowship year, we did a boot camp, and then we came back and did a lot of brainstorming when we got to concept development using tenets and techniques that we were taught by the D School. And there's just nothing like being in a room with a couple of people and you all of a sudden strike on a really fruitful direction of brainstorming, and you can just feel it when that group gets going, and when you really get to striking through a lot of exciting ideas. Some of the best moments of my fellowship were in that little room with lots of sticky notes doing brainstorming. So let's move on to the next question. It looks like we're starting to build up some questions in the Q&A, so we'll do one more, and then we'll start grabbing some of the questions on the Q&A. So the last thing, the question here would be, what was the biggest challenge of your fellowship year? Vic, why don't you go? I saw you unmute
I'll jump in. I think the biggest challenge for me, and I would say across my entire team, our year, was figuring out how to work together as a cohesive team when everyone was, you know, very high achieving type A individuals, and there was no hierarchy on the team. So we had to develop a process of coming up, you know, with a consensus decision when you have some very strong-willed individuals who have very strong opinions one way or the other. So we spent a lot of time working on the team dynamics and how we would develop a process to make some of the really important decisions, and then really just learning, you know, how to respectfully disagree with each other. So I think that was one of the biggest challenges, but also one of the most rewarding aspects of the fellowship.
Vic, before you stop that topic, would you talk about, it was probably Julian for your year and now Doug as a facilitator of all that?
Absolutely. One of the resources that we're very fortunate to have in biodesign is a psychologist that is a part of our faculty that is there to help the teams work through some of those team dynamic issues throughout the year. And they really help to facilitate team cohesion and teaching a process of how to work through some of the problems that will inevitably arise from a team perspective. I thought that was great because I'd never gone through any of those types of team dynamic trainings. So having an expert whose sole job was there to make sure that the teams were successfully working together is a big, big benefit of our program.
I'll just tack on to that a little bit, because I think one of the things that encourages is a level of transparency between teammates that I think ends up being just incredibly helpful and fruitful. And to be quite frank, it's like 6 years after starting ZenFlow has still kind of permeated the way that we approach, you know, good teamwork.
I can hop in also. I think another kind of similar stemming off of the team dynamics and working together with a lot of high achieving people, it's also aligning on goals, because you can come into the fellowship with a lot of different ideas. Like some people want to start a company, some people want to learn a process, are looking to change careers. And so they're very, very invested in making sure something comes out. Some are going back to an old career, so are really able to kind of come in more casually. And so I think one of the biggest challenges is definitely finding a way to work within your team so that everybody gets out of the fellowship what they want. And it can be done. And like you said, we all had similar challenges on our teams. It just requires a lot of open and honest communication. But again, very, very powerful, because I think it has empowered me moving forward in my career of thinking about what I really want to get out of something before I take it on, and being really transparent with whoever my teammates or who I'm working with. And then I'd say another challenge, at least for my year, honestly, it wasn't COVID. I just think it was really just feeling bad at something. I think a lot of us are like really good at like, we're generally high achieving people and we're doing well. And so it's really exciting to like be learning something completely new that I had never had an exposure to. Well, some of my other colleagues had. It's very different coming from a background in medicine where like pretty much that's all I know and that's all I've done up until this point. And so getting more into the business side was just completely new to me. And so trying to figure out how to be valuable and learn quickly and intake a lot of this new information was a challenge, but definitely also very rewarding part of the fellowship.
Sandy, I'm seeing a few questions that look like they're related to the application process. And I think Rhea's kind of teed up. Do you want to talk a bit about the application process, what the program is looking for in candidates, et cetera?
Sure, I can take that on. So applications are due mid-August, and I think Emily and team have really put together a pretty extensive list of FAQs that you can find on the website. So I'll try not to answer anything that's there, but I do see a lot of questions around years of experience, background, or do we filter out by specific types of backgrounds? I think if you look even just between Shreya and Rush and I, there's a huge variety of the types of backgrounds that people come from when you come from a technical side, and a large variety in the clinical side as well. And so really what we're looking for people who have a real passion for innovation, and who have already showed that passion through some of the work that they've done so far, be it working in industry on new products, or if they're in the clinical setting, that they have worked on projects and shown that they are truly headed in this direction and looking to make healthcare innovation an integral part of their career. That said, I would say that in general, we see people who are successful applicants to the program tend to be those who have completed some kind of postgraduate degree, so they're beyond their undergraduate degree, and they typically have a certain amount of experience, anywhere from 5 to 8 years of experience, and that could be someone who has been in medical school and is in their residency or is completing their fellowship, or it could be someone who has worked in industry either in an engineering or scientific capacity or in a business capacity. So we're definitely looking for people who show a very strong creative drive and who show a lot of have demonstrated already that they are focused on innovation and really looking to build that into their career. Anyone want to add anything else?
I think one thing to add is that different years have different levels of difficulty depending on which type of profile your application is. And what I mean by that is that if you're assembling a team of 4, typically what Biodesign likes to do is have someone who's a builder, someone that can make things, doesn't have to be a mechanical engineer, but could be just anybody with those skills. Someone that has got some business or operational expertise that can sort of serve as a project manager or help with the financials, has got some sales experience or something, is sort of a second seat on the bus. A clinical expert in a particular area, but oftentimes we purposely put people out of their comfort zone in their clinical chosen area. So the specific area of the clinical expertise is not always super relevant, just that they have some clinical practicing experience. And then lastly, the 4th role is some type of deep subject matter expert in a scientific field. So usually a PhD, not always, could be a PhD MD. And just like any of those roles, so builder, business, clinical, and sort of scientific, sometimes, and actually oftentimes, people come in with 2 of those 4 kind of roles, and we assemble teams of 4 based on sort of a hybrid approach. But what that means is that some years, out of 100 or 200 applicants, there's a certain number of seats for MDs, and maybe there's a smaller number of MDs that year that apply, and maybe other years there's a smaller number of engineers or a smaller number of business people. So if you've got a question about how do I get into the fellowship, having a diversity in your own experience will definitely give you an advantage to make sure that you can sort of check the boxes and fit into any one of the teams, no matter what the typical application ebb and flow is for that particular year.
Great. I see a couple of these that you guys have marked that you're going to answer live. Shreya, it looks like you've got the top one. Do you want to take that one on?
Sorry, mute. I just want to speak a little bit to the, the qualities of an engineering person. I think it speaks to, Rush's statement about how these are collaborative teams with various backgrounds. Usually there is an engineer on the team. I think there are some obvious answers here where, bringing your engineering chops and the ability to prototype and iterate on prototypes and develop, figure out failure modes and develop the new, iteration design. All of that is kind of baseline expectation. The thing I wanted to add on top of that is that there's also an expectation that just in true biodesign form, at least at the beginning of the fellowship program, you have to stay laser focused on defining very clearly what your unmet clinical need is and that you're pursuing. And the reason why I wanted to answer this question live is because I think as engineers, sometimes we get caught up in going straight to a solution. And honestly, that was a challenge for me, is remaining solution agnostic throughout the process of really clearly defining what the unmet clinical need is. And that is the MO of the biodesign process, is making sure that you get it just right, so that when you do end up developing your solution, there's no questions as to whether it addresses the need. And I think that takes a certain amount of discipline and open-mindedness on the part of an engineer to say, I'm going to put that part of my brain aside for a second and really dig into what the problems are before getting into the solution.
Thanks, Shreya, for mentioning that. I think that's a really important tenet of what biodesign is, and it's something that those of us who are builders or makers have a tendency to jump ahead, and it's certainly a discipline to learn to back it up and really define the need. Let's see, Rush, it looks like you had one you were going to answer live.
Yeah, that was on the team roles piece. I think that was covered.
Oh, okay. I was going to say this one was around at what stage are the projects when you finish the fellowship, and what mechanisms are in place to build out the business if someone decides to try to take a project further beyond the end of the fellowship? So I can jump in there, and I'm sure others have thoughts as well. I guess the stated goal of biodesign is not to start companies. It's just that as a sort of side effect of all this great mentorship and this wonderful process, is that companies typically come out of it. And, again, the most important thing is the education. And as Ariel mentioned, it's not always the person's goal or every person on your team's goal. Some teams actually start a company, but individual team members will go off into industry or go into academia or clinical medicine. So I wouldn't place too much emphasis on that. All that being said, during the actual fellowship year, there is a stipend, so you have a little bit to live off of. And then after the fellowship year is concluded, sometimes, not always, but sometimes there is a little bit of, I would say, very short-term financial support to kind of help the baby birds grow a little bit stronger to kind of leave the nest. But then it's really, you're on your own. And when I say on your own, I mean that in the financial sense. I don't mean that in the community sense. There's an amazing community of people
that can help mentor you, can help support your projects. There's different incubator programs around the Bay Area that all know and respect biodesign. Typically what happens is fellows will do some form of either complete bootstrapping or half consulting, half working on their startup to kind of bridge them over the chasm of where biodesign ends and sort of where a fully funded company that you can draw some sort of a salary actually starts. Everyone's journey is a little bit different, but you know, there's a lot of people that have kind of you know, trodden that path and are there to mentor and help along the way through that.
Great, thanks for taking that one on, Rush. Let's see, Vic, it looks like you were going to answer what a typical day in the fellowship looks like.
That's an easy one. There is no typical day in the fellowship. You know, the biodesign process is very involved and teaches different things at different stages. And those different stages can dramatically change what your day-to-day looks like. So for example, in the first part of the program, there's a boot camp phase where you're learning a little bit about a lot of different things to kind of get all of the fellows at the same baseline of knowledge, both about the clinical area and other aspects of med tech. So there are a lot more lectures, et cetera, that you'll sit through in the first phase. Once you move into clinical immersion, every day is in the hospital, in the clinics, in the operating room, or other aspects of, you know, observing the delivery of healthcare. And that's very different than the sitting through lectures portion. And then when you move into brainstorming, it's a lot more, you know, team collaboration and inventing and brainstorming. In the implementation phase, you may be in the Stanford lab building something and using heavy equipment and et cetera. So I think, you know, there is no typical day, which is the great thing about biodesign. You'll never get bored in this program because there's so much to do and so much variety.
All right. I'm going to go back to a couple of questions that I know that we talked on in previous webinars, just to make sure that we get some of these topics discussed. So one of those would be externships. So does someone want to take on talking about externships, what they did during their externship, what the externship is, and how it kind of fits into the fellowship? And just unmute yourself and go. Oh, Ariel, what?
Precious, so why don't you go for it?
So yeah, so I just completed my externship. Well, I guess now it's been a month or so, but we did move to remote. I did my externship at IDEO and joined their Design for Health studio, working with one of the teams that was working with a med tech startup to help increase their customer base. It was a really, really great experience for me as someone with a medical background that actually didn't have any industry experience. And it was almost immediately taking everything I had learned in biodesign and applying it in the real world with a client. And realizing I had learned a lot, which was really, really nice. They were Biodesign and IDEO have this long-standing kind of relationship from both of their inception. And so I was very welcome. I was very much integrated into the team, and it was very, very busy, even though we had moved remotely. Luckily, the Bay Area is well set up to kind of move everything to kind of online platforms, even online brainstorming and online collaboration tools. I learned how to use so many different things like Figma and other kind of prototyping and brainstorming boards. And so that was 5 weeks, and I was actually able to see the project through from start to finish, which was really nice. I'm just starting from the beginning all the way through the end. And I know a lot of my other class still completed their externships, although remotely, and all had a pretty good experience. If you go into it, I think I would use the externship as something either one of two ways. One, if you're looking for a specific job in an area and you want to make a good connection, that's definitely, the externship is kind of a free job interview for 5 weeks, is something that's very, very useful. And then for me, I wanted to use it as an opportunity to explore another area that I'm interested in, because I do have to go back and finish residency, but I do know I want to make a career in kind of design thinking and innovation of how does it work outside in the real world to give me some experience earlier rather than later after I graduate from my program. And so I think the externship is a really, really valuable part of this fellowship and has been a good springboard for a lot of fellows to either bridge into a new industry, discover that maybe they really don't like something, or again, make really great connections in the area that'll be useful in the future.
So how did the rest of you guys spend your externships, and how did it complement what you ended up deciding to do after biodesign?
I can speak to that. Having a regulatory background for my externship, I actually ended up helping a company through their pre-submission process with FDA. And it actually ended up being in Galway, Ireland, which was kind of fun to be there for a little while. But it was a little bit of a test ground for me as to whether I wanted to approach anything regulatory related or become a consultant and work specifically on regulatory projects after the fellowship, or wanted to do something else. And so, you know, even though it was invigorating experience, you know, I remembered that part of the reason why I applied to biodesign was to get kind of a higher level perspective and work on various parts of a project, not just regulatory.
I had a very similar experience, Shreya, but from a medical perspective. I joined a small startup, a mid-stage startup that was approaching their clinical phase and wanted some help with clinical trial design and evaluation of data. And I also learned that I did not want to do that forever, and I wanted a much broader involvement in medtech.
And then I went to a startup incubator. One of the benefits of the Bay Area is that there's several of these sort of flagship medical device incubators that they don't just work on one startup at a time, but they work on multiple of them as a process, because that's sort of one of my ultimate goals. And was able to kind of work on a focused project for one of those companies, but also be exposed to some of the broader decisions that are happening within the incubator as a whole. So I echo the sentiments of everyone else, is that, take advantage of the externship time to do something that, you normally wouldn't get the experience for at this stage of your career.
Great. And I did my externship at a venture capital firm. And so it was an introduction to being on the other side of the table, since I had spent a lot of time pitching to VCs in my prior life. And it was both eye-opening to how they go through their own process of deciding where to make investments, and also helped me understand from my own self that I am much more of a maker and a doer than an investor. And so that I think, like Shreya and Vick, it was helpful in choosing a direction that I was not interested in pursuing immediately after the fellowship. So clearly, you can use the externship to uncover new directions for yourself career-wise, and you can also use it to help you winnow down some of the many opportunities in front of you. So I see there's a couple more that folks are going to answer live. And I do think one of the things we should address as well is international applicants. So biodesign is open to applicants from all over the world. And if you are selected, we do help you with that process and sponsor a visa for you to come to the United States for the fellowship. We do not have a particular number of fellows per year that come from an international background versus from a US background. We are typically looking at this on a candidate by candidate basis. So I would say on average, we have somewhere between 1 and 3 fellows per year who are coming to us and come in on a visa. So let's see, Vic, why don't you take on the next one around what physicians end up doing after biodesign?
Certainly. Physicians tend to come into the Biodesign Fellowship at 2 different stages. One, a fellow can come in who is in the middle of their residency and taking a year or 2 off as part of their required residency research years to do the Biodesign Fellowship. Those fellows are typically required to go back into their residency at the end of biodesign. Other fellows have completed their medical training and residency and then are free to choose different pathways once they leave the Biodesign Fellowship. Some decide to go back into full-time practicing of medicine. Some go into startups, some become consultants. So there really is no single path that physicians take after biodesign. And that goes back to there being a number of opportunities that are open because of the program that many physicians decide to take advantage of.
All right, and let's see, Ariel, it looks like you had one you were going to answer live as well around the theme.
Yeah, so I think that is always the most exciting part. Everyone always wants to know what the kind of theme or the clinical area for biodesign will be that year. And no, they will not release it ahead of time. And it's actually, I just wanted to answer it live because the impetus behind the question seemed to make sure it aligned with the backgrounds and maybe what skills and experiences you bring. But actually the point is really to bring people from diverse experiences and not necessarily just lean into what you already know. It's to hopefully bring everyone into a new area so that they can learn a new process and really lean on each other, all learning new things. So I'm a general surgeon, and of course I would have loved to have been general surgery or GI, something I'm very, very comfortable with. And it was something completely different. And similarly to other, one of my teammates came from Stryker neurovascular. And so would have loved had it been neurosurgery or neurology, but again, very, very different, so that we all had the opportunity to kind of come in with an open mind and not a bunch of preconceived notions about how things are done in the field.
And then I would just add to that is, although there's a clinical theme area that you can start in at the beginning of the year, the process in its purest form will take you in a direction to find the best project, which may not actually be in that same clinical theme area. My year, the clinical theme was critical care medicine. We ended up with 3 sort of projects that became companies out of the fellowship, one in critical care medicine, one actually in breastfeeding, and one in palliative care and end of life. So it can really take you in a lot of varied directions as long as you're sort of being true and following the process.
And I would encourage all applicants to recognize that the theme sort of here is that it's really, biodesign emphasizes the process, not the project. And it's really learning that process that's going to take you to the next stage of your career.
Thanks, Shreya, for summing that up. That's a really important, and I think to that end, I think the other element of this is we are absolutely committed to having as diverse a set of people who are in the fellowship as possible, and that's diversity across a lot of different metrics. And so when you worry about what degree do I have, where I am in school, what we're looking for is a large variety of fellows and potential fellows that we can knit together. And the element there that's most important to us are really more your own leadership qualities. So your ability to be creative, to solve problems, to work in a team, to communicate well. Those are the kinds of things that we would like to see demonstrated in your application, so that we can say, now this is someone who is going to be able to fit in a team and figure out how to work in a team of people from very different backgrounds who are coming together to try to solve problems in an area that they don't know a lot about. And we're intentional about that so that you can learn the process and learn that process in as rich a way as possible. Oh boy, all of a sudden, all kinds of questions here. Rush, it looks like you commented on when you're going to answer live.
So just in terms of the VC question of, how difficult is it to raise VC dollars with the Stanford Biodesign name behind your technology? It is extremely difficult. And it is, I would say, extremely difficult no matter with Biodesign, without Biodesign, just raising VC dollars in general, especially at the early stage of your career with limited track record is just very, very difficult. That being said, I had started a company prior to Biodesign in the Midwest. Had raised a small sort of Series A with that company prior to Biodesign. That effort was a lot harder than what I experienced in sort of the Silicon Valley community. And certainly while the Biodesign name will get you the meeting, at the end of the day, the work that you do during the fellowship to follow the process and do your diligence and really put together a beautiful business case around a compelling and truly unmet valuable need, that's what actually gets you the fundraising. The benefits of Silicon Valley sort of comprising the bulk of VC dollars invested in the entire United States is just a secondary benefit of being locally located to that. But you know, I wouldn't expect to come in and just, you know, do a couple pitches and then raise money. It's incredibly difficult no matter where you are.
Do either of the other of you who have raised money off of your biodesign projects want to comment on that, Shreya or Vic?
It's hard to raise VC funding, no matter what. Yeah.
Agreed.
Yep. Okay, so let's see. I'm not seeing a lot of new questions. I definitely see a lot of stuff coming up on the list. So let me go back to a couple of questions that we've answered in the past. So one of the things that folks have asked is, what do you wish you had changed about your fellowship year? Is there something that, looking back, you wish you had done differently or you wish had been different about your fellowship year? Don't all jump in at once.
I wouldn't change it.
Yeah, it's a difficult question because, you know, that year set the trajectory for where I am now, which I think was a great trajectory for me. So I don't think I would have changed anything about it either. I think during the fellowship, you always wish it was longer and you had more exposure to certain parts, et cetera. But in the end, I wouldn't change anything.
Shreya, do you want to say anything, or Ariel?
I would say the same thing. Yeah, and again, it's more about it's more about the process. Taking the process, learn from the people around you, and you'll get a lot out of it.
Yeah, I'm just going to echo what everyone else said in that nothing, I really wouldn't change anything. And even like Vic said, the process or that year has kind of put me on this great trajectory to move forward. And even, and so I can even speak to the end, like the end of the fellowship when we did move to remote. One positive thing was that we had already formed our teams and had spent most of our time to each other. So we did already have a rapport, and it was mostly just learning how to be collaborative online. I think that will be a challenge in the future of depending on what's in person versus online and that kind of thing. But I think we have really great teachers and really great mentors that are able to effectively communicate, give feedback, teach through a virtual platform. So I don't think there'll be any loss in that area. But for me, with my team, when we got redispatched on COVID needs, one of my teammates and I were actually able to narrow in on one that was really, really valuable. And we're still working on that project. And so applying for grants and moving that forward. And that actually gave me an opportunity to kind of pursue the second year of kind of like biodesign and research, potentially starting a company. And so, which may not have happened had COVID not hit. So even when things get turned around that were unexpected, it's still, the biodesign process really shows you a way to move forward and how to learn from even challenges.
Ariel, actually, would you just mind taking one step back and saying how the last couple months of the fellowship went and what happened with COVID?
Yeah, so we were, Stanford kind of shut down around March, and that was right before we were about to start the second implementation boot camp. So we had the first implementation boot camp right after the new year, which was more into kind of regulatory, prototyping, business development of your top need. And then the second one was really getting down into the weeds of those things. And so that second the implementation boot camp was held virtually, and they were both kind of 3 all-day seminars where we had lawyers come in and talk to us about regulatory things. And it worked really well. Honestly, it was exhausting to sit in front of Zoom all day, but I think we've all gotten built up our kind of Zoom stamina now in the light of the pandemic. So that was really good. And then the teams at that point in the fellowship, you're a lot more team-based, where you kind of set your own schedule. You decide when we're all going to meet to brainstorm, when you're all going to meet to work. And so we did in the kind of the same way we would have done if we were in the offices, and said, all right, we had our shared calendar for our team, and like, we're going to do this on this day. We created our own deliverables. We still had our weekly meetings with mentors. They were just virtually. And so as far as, I think maybe the biggest difficulty or the loss was for teams that were in like heavy prototyping stages. And we had also kind of like just started prototyping. It was a lot harder to not really have anywhere to go or be able to have access to the collab or access to the PRL at Stanford. And so a lot of that transition to kind of like in-home prototyping without the big machinery, but you got really creative with what you were able to do, and a lot more modeling, a lot more research to kind of say, okay, would this particular pathway work? Able to dig more into the literature because you couldn't go out and necessarily try it yourself. A lot of those things are changing moving forward, and so it may look differently for the next crop of fellows, but we were able to get around it and still have the great meetings with our mentors, which I think are probably the biggest asset and value of the fellowship, and get good feedback on our needs and our projects from kind of these big giants in medtech.
Great, and I will follow on to that and make a comment about this coming year, because as we're all well aware, it's really unclear how the next year to 18 months are going to go with regards to the pandemic. So the fellowship for this year has been pushed back to a start in September that aligns with the academic calendar here at the university. And so consequently, those fellows will be staying a little bit longer than is in a typical year. What we don't know yet is whether the 2021-2022 fellowship, which is the one that you all would be applying for, is also going to be pushed back to that September start date. So that is something to keep in mind. That's still in flux. Our traditional start date would be August 1st. The other thing that we are not yet clear on is how we will be doing interviews this year. So we typically bring approximately 30 candidates to Stanford to do in-person interviews in the November timeframe. And so while we still have that time set aside, we are still looking at how we will do the interviews this year, and what will be available to us as a way to interview candidates. So let's see. I will move here to Vic. It looks like you had one you were going to answer live.
Yes, so there's a question of how would we compare the biodesign program to getting an MBA with the goal of working in medtech? First, before I answer, I'm trying to remember if anyone on the panel has an MBA, because I would punt that to you. I thought Rush did. Okay, Rush, why don't I punt that to you as our panel expert here?
Well, I mean, the biggest difference is in an MBA, you're learning one sort of subject, you're learning business. And in the biodesign ecosystem within the medtech world, you are learning about clinical medicine, you're learning about business, you're learning about engineering, you're learning about reimbursement and regulatory affairs. And certainly you get that from the faculty of the program and the mentors, but you know, to be on a team with someone like Shreya, who's worked at the FDA as your team member and sort of soak in all that knowledge, and then to turn around and talk to Vic and Ariel about, you know, clinical medicine and what they experience, you know, by, you know, a night shift, or, you know, having a really difficult surgical case, or, you know, there's no comparison really with that between a traditional educational degree, because your best teachers within the program are your team members. And you then have a responsibility to teach them about business, about engineering, about whatever you bring to the table. And that's what really makes this sort of team, you know, click, and the companies that come out of it actually be successful.
Great, thanks, Rush. That was a great explanation. I think a really important point to make. Let's see, we have about 5 minutes left, and we've got a couple of questions still. Let me pull up one more from our list of questions we've answered in the past, and that is, how did biodesign change your career path? So maybe I'll take that on to start. So because I came out of a biotech background, so I was very focused on medicines and therapeutics, I completely transitioned into medtech with the use of the fellowship. And I also used it as a way to transition out of bench science and out of a technical role into one that was more strategy and business focused. Since then, I would really say that you know, being in the Biodesign Fellowship and having done the Biodesign Fellowship allowed me to really grow that strand of my personality that was focused on innovation, that just gets delighted by brainstorming, that really is enjoys and is driven by wanting to create something new. And so being able to use biodesign as a way to have additional conversations, do education through mentorship here at the center, it has really expanded my ability to focus on innovation as a career path. It wasn't something I thought you could do. You know, we all get so focused on like, oh, I'm going to be an engineer, I'm a scientist, or I'm a clinician. And instead, you know, I'm an innovator. And that really is something that I feel like the biodesign process gives you the ability to live into in a much stronger way. So I'll pass it to the rest of you guys.
I can go. I think that for me, it drastically changed my career path. But I think up until the Biodesign Fellowship, I just had this idea that I wanted to be an innovator and do things of that nature. And now I feel I genuinely have the training to do that. And it's given me a lot of confidence, even going back into training, thinking about how I want to shape my career, because I know that this was really interesting to me. For others who are coming back from more academic backgrounds or from medicine, where a lot of the push for kind of professional development and is through research and, you know, case studies and clinical outcomes and things of that nature, that never really excited me. And now I'm so inspired that I have this area that I know I can contribute to the field of medicine that's completely different, that is also valuable. So, and feeling empowered that I can actually make that a part of my career. So I think the Biodesign Fellowship has been really, really incredible and kind of giving me that confidence and knowledge to move forward in the career path that is right for me. Like you're saying, you don't want to just be a builder or just be a business person. It really gives you this breadth of experience to really overarch a couple of different areas, which is really, really exciting.
I was just going to tack on to that I think that breadth of knowledge and that experience is a key facet of being a leader in health technology. And I think it gives you a really good, that's why I think biodesign is such a springboard for people to, you know, rise to different levels and take on different opportunities, whether that's entrepreneurship with their own project or, you know, climbing a ladder of a big corporation. I just think that overarching view, that generalistic view of understanding all the different challenges and how that can drive a project strategy, or how it should drive project strategy, is just it's so critical for any technology to succeed.
Really well said, Treya. Vic, it looks like you are going to address the Harvard Health Tech Fellowship at Harvard.
Yes, so there's a question about other health tech programs. So Stanford Biodesign is not the only health tech training program in the United States. There are a number of other programs. Some of them are degree conferring programs like master's programs, and some are not. Stanford Biodesign is the first and the longest running. But there are a number of other programs that I'm not very familiar with from a curriculum standpoint, but a number of other programs that I've heard very good things about.
I'll add to that that, you know, Stanford Biodesign is the source book for a lot of the curriculum that is biodesign curriculum. And I would say that that curriculum is a living, breathing creature. And so coming to Stanford means that you are working with the folks who developed that process and who are still continuing to develop that process and moving it forward and continuously improving it as we go along. I think we have a really strong partnership with the other groups around Stanford, between the School of Medicine, School of Engineering, the Design School, and the Business School. And that provides us a lot of uniqueness that is hard to replicate other places. Last, I would say that 20 years, you know, it means something when it comes to the alumni. So we have a 20-year deep alumni association, and that alumni association is something that you never graduate from. The Alumni Association has an app where we can exchange resources and ideas. We have events on a regular basis to bring everybody together, and so we act as a very strong community to support amongst each other the kinds of projects that are both coming up and out of the fellowship, and also the people who are coming up and out of the fellowship. So anyone else want to add anything?
The other thing I'll add is there are very few places in the world that are as conducive to medtech innovation as Silicon Valley. So, that's another aspect of our program that makes us very unique.
All right, and I'm looking at the time and I realize we've just hit our 1 hour mark. So any last little thoughts? Otherwise, we'll wrap it up.
I realized in answering one of the questions, someone mentioned our passion and enthusiasm, and it's important to remember it's fun. It's a fun process. It's a fun fellowship.
It may change your life.
All right, let's leave it there. Thanks, you guys. Appreciate everyone joining us for the webinar, and this great group of alumni here who were here to answer your questions. So thanks so much. There will be a recording of this on the Biodesign website. So if you want to go back and listen to it again or point other people to it, that would be great. Thanks so much.
Bye, everyone.
Look.
Bye.
Bye, thanks.